I'd like to thank you, all of you guys who managed to come all the way from from London, from outside London, and managed to gather here in front of MSD, the Malaysian Students Department. This is, although we are like 6,000 miles apart, from Malaysia, this is the closest we can get. And in our hearts, that Malaysia is still close to us.
Okay. Why don't you do the hidup first and I'll come in. Okay.
Hidup, hidup,
Hidup, hidup,
hidup rakyat,
hidup rakyat,
hidup, hidup,
hidup, hidup,
hidup rakyat,
hidup rakyat.
Daulat, daulat,
Daulat, daulat,
daulat tuanku,
daulat tuanku,
daulat, daulat,
daulat, daulat,
daulat tuanku.
daulat tuanku.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
SPR.
Reform.
SPR.
Reform.
SPR,
Reform.
SPR,
Reform.
SPR,
Reform.
SPR,
Reform.
SPR,
Reform.
SPR.
Reform.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
So today, I'd like to present Joseph from Human Rights.
Working on human rights.
Working on human rights, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you again and welcome all of you, Malaysian supporters of reform in Malaysia. For too long, we have been denied our fundamental rights to fair and free elections. These rights are protected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many other universal declarations around the world. We have been, in elections, opposition has been denied access to media for too long. Media is controlled by the government, and people who want free and fair access have been denied this access. We have seen the continuous use of phantom voters over the past many elections. Voters that do not exist, people who have died but continue to keep on voting year after year, and this is a major problem for elections in Malaysia. We have seen the arbitrary delineation of parliamentary states. Whenever they want to expand the seats, they delineate their states according to their own preferences, and this is a major problem also. And finally, we have seen the continuous denials of ceramah by the opposition at elections. Time after time, the police comes using arbitrarily the Police Act, to shut down public talks, to shut down public ceramahs. And this is unacceptable in this day and age of freedom and the right to freedom of expression. Therefore, I think we are calling today that this is a time for change.
Yes.
It's a time for change, and the time for change is now. We cannot wait anymore.
Change
Malaysians
now.
are calling for that change. We must have equal and opportunity access to the media. Media must be open to all, not just to the government, but also to the opposition groups.
Yeah.
Yes, for all Malaysians.
We need to clean up the electoral roll. Enough of phantom voters. Enough of people who do not exist. The electoral roll needs to be cleaned up so that everybody who is been registered can get to vote. I think that is very important.
Yeah.
Right? We need to make sure that gatherings are allowed. Whether they are government or opposition, they are allowed, without any need for a police permit. Why do we need a police permit to get together to discuss the situation of our country?
It's a free society.
We should be able to do it because it's a fundamental right. Okay? And we also call for the right to have indelible ink. That's very important to ensure that, again, that there's no fraud in our elections.
Yes.
It's time for all of us to call for it, and we're gathered here today to do that. The time is, we have waited too long for this to happen. So we as Malaysians, let us now call once again for fair and free elections in Malaysia. What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Free elections.
What do we want it?
Now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.